Chapter 4 of No Hard Feelings. Michael Santos, author here, MichaelSantosAuthor.com, and welcome to another episode of my first novel, told one chapter at a time. As always, if you'd like to get your own copy of the book, they are available at MichaelSantosAuthor.com in paperback or Kindle ebook. And if you enjoy this video and the others on my channel, please like, comment, and subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell notification so you'll always know when the new episode drops. Now, this particular chapter, I have to say, was one of my favorites to write in the entire novel. It has a very classic crime fiction feel to it, in my opinion, and as a huge fan of the genre, it was a lot of fun to really dig into the tropes and put my own spin on them. This book, I think, more than my second and third novels, which we'll get to eventually in this series, plays on those classic tropes a little bit more. I wanted this one to have an old-school noir vibe to it, as my first entry into the crime fiction genre. So without further ado, here's Chapter 4 of No Hard Feelings. The night after the purgatory job, the Apostle hopped a late bus out to an apartment building southeast of Uptown, in the older part of Elizabeth. 3 flights of stairs up, he got to number 307, knocked on the door. A woman answered. She wore her straight black hair down, shoulder length, framing her high cheekbones she'd hit with blush. She had long legs, smooth skin, curves all the way up that always got him, and red nail polish that looked fresh. He could picture her as a famous actress or a model, the kind of woman who could have had a good life doing something like that, rather than spending her time with somebody like him. Tonight, she had on a black choker and an unbuttoned white shirt he'd left there the last time, and that was all she had on. They didn't say a word to each other. She pulled him inside, and he kicked the door shut behind them. Second later, she had her tongue down his throat. Her hands played around in his hair, then reached for his belt, and she tugged him toward the bedroom. He picked her up, ran his hands along those long legs, laid her on the bed. She stretched out, pushed the shirt from her shoulders so it was halfway down her arms. Like that, she watched him undress, her lips a little parted with expectation. One finger went to her mouth, showing off that new coat of polish. The shirt was still down around her arms, all the way open now, when she grabbed his neck, pulled him in close. A while later, the shirt was on the floor, across the room. Now Eve Bennett smoked, looked the Apostle up and down, as she did every time after they'd finished. He watched the wisps rise from the cigarette to the popcorn ceiling. The apartment was decent but plain. Her bedroom was small, soft blue walls, a single window overlooking the parking lot. She had a dresser across from the bed, a skirt-covered nightstand, and that was it. He'd never once seen personal touches like pictures of her family in the place. The surface of the dresser was littered with all kinds of makeup, a lot of it for the stage. The most valuable items in the room were a keyboard and an acoustic guitar sitting in the corner. She was a musician, played the local club scene. He'd met her in one of those music clubs about 7 months ago, a joint to the east of the city, in the industrial part of town where the railway came through. She did her last song of the night, came off the stage, and went to the bar, where he was sitting. He bought her a drink, told her how much he enjoyed her voice, liked how smooth it was. She said, "Really?" Most guys, she told him, they didn't care so much about her voice when she was on stage. But he honestly did, and she seemed to appreciate that. It wasn't until he saw her there at the bar, close to her, that he paid attention to her looks. He asked her if she played anywhere else around town. Could he come and see her again sometime? She told him yes, gave him a list of her performances for the next week, and said he'd better be there. She'd look for him in the crowd. And he didn't miss a single one. He wanted to get to know this woman more. Eve Bennett had a ring to it he liked. They talked more after each show, and he asked all about her. Where was she from? Virginia. How did she end up in Charlotte? She'd heard the music scene was pretty good here, decided to give it a shot. Then she spent a couple of years playing around town, one club stage to the next, still hoping to get hired as a regular act somewhere. They shared the things they liked and disliked about life, and by the end of the week, they liked a lot about each other. Still, he'd kept a calculated distance between them, couldn't let her know everything about who he was, what he did. He made sure the relationship stayed somewhat detached. She'd always gone along with it, never pushed him into telling her things. Lately, he'd been thinking of changing that. Confess at least some of it to her. Walk away from his line of work, ask her to come with him somewhere. She didn't have to know who he'd been, so long as they moved on together. He'd leave his moniker and his work behind, but for now, it seemed they both enjoyed the way it was, so what else was there to worry about? "You know," he said, smiling at her, "except for when I'm with you, my life is crap. And that might sound like a line, but it's not, it's true." She said in that smooth voice, "Then you should visit me more often, Polly. It's been too long since we saw each other. Guess we've both been working too much." He frowned at her, said, "Why do you keep calling me Polly? I told you before I don't like it." She put a hand on the side of his face, moved her fingers against his beard. "It's funny because you act like this tough guy from New York. And it's cute. It makes me feel like there was a nice man in there once." He said, "There is, somewhere." Was he trying to convince her of that, or himself? He looked at her as she took a long drag on the cigarette and let the smoke out in a slow stream through those red lips he liked so much. Then he said, "I just had a payday. Let me take you for a fancy dinner, one of those trendy places in Uptown or South Park. Or something else the nice guys do, yeah? I want to be a nice guy for you." She brought a polished finger up to her chin, thinking about that. "Okay, if you want to do something nice for me, you could bring me some flowers next time. A bunch of roses would be romantic." "I hate roses." "You're not the first person I've heard say that. A lot of people hate them. Flowers remind them of funerals. Is that how it is for you?" "Yeah," he said, "that's how it is." She threw off the sheet, grabbed a fresh cigarette from the box on her nightstand, thumbed her lighter. He liked the way she smoked, the way she played with the cigarette between her fingers, tapped the ashes off with a dainty flick of the wrist, then took another drag like she meant it. He could tell she enjoyed the whole routine. Seemed to make her feel relaxed, comfortable. Maybe some of it was her putting on a show for him, too. And he liked the way she looked at him. He could tell, watching her eyes, she was evaluating him the way he'd learned to study people. The apostle would size them up, decide how useful or how big a threat they would be. And it's what had kept him alive so long in his business. She was giving him that same treatment. Yeah, now he was sure Eve was putting on a show. She was just like him, that was it, knew how to play the game and the people around her. Sometimes he'd wondered why he was so drawn to her, but now he understood. So what did she hope to gain from a guy like him? Why had she stayed with him, even though he was always hiding himself from her? Eve stared into the flame of her lighter, said, "Did you see somebody burn down that club, Purgatory?" He didn't answer, just nodded. What was she bringing this up for? Maybe she'd heard it on the news, thought it was an exciting story. "I just got a new job a week ago, working for the guys who owned it, Isaiah Jackson and Jack Vignali." The apostle couldn't believe it. Said, "At Purgatory?" The first of many questions running through his mind. He felt himself panicking now, wondering if she'd been there the night of the fire, if he'd put her life in danger too. "No, at their other club, Dante's," she said, and the apostle could breathe again. "It's a music club, like the one where we met, remember? I like those better than nightclubs. No dancing, no techno, just me and a guitar or a piano playing for a bar and lounge. There's a live band to back me up. I have a regular show schedule. No more fighting to get stage time at every club in the city. And it pays well, plus tips. It's a great gig." She paused to take another drag, said, "I mean, even though I know what kind of people Isaiah and Jack are." "That doesn't bother you?" "Of course it does. But this is the break I've been waiting for. I couldn't turn it down. I'm just glad this arsonist, whoever he is, didn't burn down Dante's instead." Now the apostle wondered if Eve knew what he'd done. If she did, his secret was out, and all of a sudden he felt like he was being played here. She slid back into bed, laid on her left side facing him, didn't bother to cover back up with the sheet. Like she was as comfortable handling him as she was with her cigarettes. He glared at her. Yeah, she was playing him all right, but he still couldn't tell what she was after, or what exactly she knew about him. "You and Isaiah, you two any kind of close?" She looked offended, said, "You mean have I been with him? God, Paul, I should throw you out for that. I auditioned. He said yes. That's all, and that's all it ever will be. God, I can't believe you." No, he said, shaking his head. "I mean, do you tell him things? Do you talk to him?" "Only about the music I'm working on, the staging, things like that." "And what about Jack Vignali? You talk to him too?" "No, not really." "What's that mean, not really?" "I've never had a conversation with him. But, like today, I overheard him say he wants to find the person who burned the club," looking him in the eyes as she said it. "Warning him or toying with him?" "Does he know who it is?" "I'm not sure. He wasn't talking to me." "Who was he talking to?" "Some woman." The apostle put a little grit into his voice. "Who was she?" "I don't know. It was my first day. I don't know most of the people at Dante's yet, but they were sitting at a table right against the stage while I was rehearsing. I don't think he knew I could hear bits of their conversation over the music. Honestly, he seemed drunk." "You hear him say anything else?" "Wait, why are you so interested whether I talk to Jack and Isaiah? I mean, they're my bosses. Of course I'll be talking to them." He hesitated, then said, "I'm just curious about your new gig, that's all. Tell me, what else did you hear?" Laying it on in a sweeter tone, trying to play her in return. Her eyes narrowed a little, still studying him, reading his reactions. She said, "I thought I heard your name come up, but I must have misheard him. I mean, you don't know anything about all this." Eve raising her eyebrows now. "Do you?" He got out of bed, put on his clothes quick, grabbed that white shirt across the room. What he didn't do was look at her, just turned his back and stood there in the bedroom doorway. She knew who he was and what he'd done. She had to, and he had to get out of there. "What's wrong with you, Polly?" "You already know the answer to that, yeah?" Eve watched Paul from the window. He looked so small sitting there at the bus stop, in the dim glow cast by the lights in the parking lot. She should have been horrified to learn what he really was, a killer. She had heard it first from Jack and hadn't wanted to believe it, but after talking to Paul, she knew it had to be true. And yet, she wasn't horrified. Why not? She suspected he loved her. Did she love him too? Was she even interested in love anymore after escaping her ex-husband, Jimmy? She'd married Jimmy Franks out of high school. He was handsome and confident and made her laugh. All terrible reasons to make a lifelong commitment to somebody, but she'd been too young to see what a son of a bitch he was. Jimmy used to blame her for everything wrong in his life. Eve earned a modest income playing the Richmond clubs. Meanwhile, Jimmy had a crap job as a gas station cashier. He wanted her to give up on her passion for music. In his mind, it was her fault they didn't have money. Telling her maybe if she was working a real job, he'd have the flexibility to go to school, get a degree, and a better career. Like working at a gas station was any kind of career. The truth? Jimmy was lazy and stayed in that job because it was easier to blame her than it was to work hard at something else. And if he was so upset about how little money they had, then why did he go out every night and drop $100 bar hopping, huh? Well, that was apparently her fault too. He drank because he had a bad life and because she was always getting on him about everything. He'd even get suspicious about where she was going, paranoid she was having affairs with men who came to see her perform. So he'd park his truck at the very end of the driveway of their old townhouse. She'd have to ask him to move it whenever she wanted to leave. That way he could keep tabs on everywhere she went and on everything she did. That was when he'd started drinking more and slapping her around. She gave him one chance to fix himself after the first time he hit her. Then pressed charges when he came after her with his belt one night. Jimmy got carried off in a police car, and now he was serving a prison sentence. She'd visited him only once to tell him about the divorce papers she was filing. He didn't put up a fight over it. After that, Eve fled Richmond to leave all of that behind. And because she didn't want to be around when Jimmy would get out. She came to Charlotte and met Paul, and here she was, watching him out her window as he got carried off on a bus. So why wasn't she disgusted by what Paul was? Maybe because she'd always felt safe with him. Jimmy, the man who'd once promised to love and cherish her, had become a monster. The worst part was how he had made her feel like some victim, first with verbal abuse and then physical. And after so many years of it, she still couldn't shake that feeling. God, she wanted to. It was like Jimmy was always there in the back of her mind, like she hadn't really escaped him. She was afraid she never would. She felt trapped, claustrophobic in her own head whenever she thought about it. But here was Paul, this alleged criminal, who had never done anything to hurt her. She'd seen what a real monster was like, and Paul Byrne, despite what else he might be, wasn't the same as Jimmy. But did she love Paul? Maybe. What she loved was never feeling like a victim with him. If anything, he put her up on a pedestal. What had happened tonight, when she tried to pull a confession out of him, and he'd gotten upset, that was different. But even then, he hadn't hit her, hadn't yelled or screamed in her face or blamed her for his problems. Of course, she couldn't be with him anymore. It was over. It had to be. Still, Paul was the victim in this situation, or he would be if her new bosses were really as dangerous as she thought. God, and the way Jack had been looking at her earlier when she was rehearsing? Jimmy used to look at her that way, right before he'd come after her. So what if she could save Paul from them? Maybe she was the only one who could. That alone obligated her to do something. Did it not? No, she wasn't in love with Paul, but if she could save him, then maybe she wouldn't feel like a victim anymore. Bus ride home, the 3 other passengers sat away from the apostle, shot nervous glances at him every few minutes, like they were afraid of him, just from the look on his face. He couldn't see his reflection in the bus window, but the way he was feeling, they had good reason to keep back. It was simple, his situation now. He had to lay low while Vignali and Jackson had it in for the schmuck who had crossed them. Perhaps he should have let Jack burn. Then thought no, his judgment had been sound. That would have been an even bigger mistake. Besides, he was never going to kill those 90 people. He'd eventually be back to apartment 307, knew he couldn't stay away. But he'd wait for things to cool down a while. He wanted Eve in his life, just couldn't stand thinking she knew what he was. He hated it when she called him Polly, but he imagined hearing her smooth voice call him the Apostle, and hated that more. And that was Chapter 4 of No Hard Feelings. Next time, we'll rejoin Lundell and Harris as they work their Purgatory Fire investigation with ATF. Once again, if you are enjoying this story, please like, comment, and subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell notification to make sure you never miss a chapter when I upload the new video. And if you'd like to follow along with your own copy of No Hard Feelings, go to MichaelSantosAuthor.com. Thank you everybody for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.